Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Sindhu Blume.
And I'm Scott McCandless. It is the week of October 13th, and this is your Monday briefing. It is day 13 of the government shutdown. The Senate returns Tuesday and will again vote on the House-passed Continuing Resolution, or CR, to fund the government until November 21st. The vote comes at an extremely important juncture, as 750,000 federal workers have been furloughed, and the Trump administration is set to lay off as much as 4,000 more federal employees in an effort to continue their ongoing talks.
And adding to the economic uncertainty, the Bureau of Economic Analysis has suspended the release of all scheduled economic reports until the current U.S. government funding resumes. And on Friday, President Trump threatened 100% tariffs on China's imports to the United States to counter new export controls recently imposed by China. We are going to talk about this and the shutdown with Todd Metcalf. Todd, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so first I want to talk about the trade piece, and this question is for both of you. So following the threat on Friday, China announced it would retaliate. So where do things stand today?
So there's been a long-running back and forth between the United States and China on tariffs. As we know, the Trump administration has imposed a wide variety of tariffs on a wide variety of countries. With regard to China, they have a couple of times now done a pause, where they said they were going to implement the tariffs and then said, we're still in talks with them, let's pause, at least in terms of some of the more amplified tariffs. They have some base tariffs in place. Those latest tariffs that were paused are due to unpause on November 10th. In the meantime, there's supposed to be an APEC conference, an Asia group of countries conference on October 31st through November 1st. The plan had been for the United States and China to meet, at least either directly or on the periphery of that conference, and talk about how to avoid or change the trajectory of the coming November 10th reset for those tariffs. Well, this seems to have been a bid to escalate the war over those particular tensions. What exactly will be the negotiating positions heading into APEC? What will be the strength or leverage from each country? And that seems to be what's happening here. There does also seem to be a bit of a market play. We saw the United States stock market react negatively to some of the news coming out late last week, and President Trump seemed to try to post some messages on social media over the weekend to allay those fears. That seems to have had an effect heading into this week of October 13th to at least calm some of the futures markets and say, look, we are talking, we're going to work this out. So far, we haven't actually seen the initiation of any of these actual tariffs. They have not gone into effect yet. And so it's still just a war of words, not actual tariffs. And we'll see where it goes this week. But this is a very volatile situation. We're going to have to monitor it closely. I still think the ultimate outcome comes in the APEC conference at the end of the month.
Okay. Any thoughts, Todd?
I mean, I think that he's right about the volatility and the sort of cyclical nature of it, the back and forth, tit for tat, et cetera, because, right now this relates to China sort of, there's obviously been, as Scott mentioned, these sort of base tariffs on various things. And the president has recently, correctly perhaps, been obsessed with rare earth minerals. China, sort of, as I understand it, sort of changed their policy in terms of how the export controls related to, because whether countries could sort of try to avoid the export controls that China was imposing on exports of rare earths if they got the rare earths from a third country, where and they're trying to now say, no, if you're going to do that, that also, triggers the problematic issues. Rare earths, as we all know, and one of the reasons that we saw the market react as it did, is in everything. Electronics, your car, whatever, and they're critically important. And so the fact that we were going to not only escalate with China, but also escalate over these particular issues or these particular items, commodities, also I think creates a sort of further economic ripple effect, if you will.
Okay, and Todd, I want to turn to the shutdown and point out also that everything we're talking about on this episode is moving very quickly, and we're filming this at 10 a.m. on Monday, so things may have changed. But what's the latest on the shutdown? I mean, what are the prospects of agreement, and what's been happening in the background?
Well, I couldn't help but note when Scott was saying that the Senate is going to come in tomorrow and they're going to vote again on the House-passed continuing resolution, which I think this may be the 6th or 7th vote that has failed and undoubtedly will fail again, which reminds me of that old phrase, if you're doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome, that's the definition of insanity. Look, and I think in this instance, unlike perhaps in past shutdowns, that may in fact be true, because I do think that Democrats really are committed to the position that they've taken. The administration, laying off workers, shutting down departments, doing a range of other things. The Democrats' view is like, look, we expect they were going to do this anyway. So this is not, we're not accelerating it or forestalling it or, any sort of thing. There's nothing that we can do right now. If we open the government tomorrow, all of that stuff, nothing's going to change. And so I do think that is kind of, creating a stalemate, a very real stalemate, where we know what the exit ramp, it seems to me, has been clear for the last week or so, and that is something to do with the extension of the ACA premium tax credits. That, there seems to be an acknowledgement of that fact by some, at least behind the scenes. The White House seems to have acknowledged it to the point of the president even saying, well, we'll negotiate on these ACA premium tax credits as soon as you open the government. But then you've got appropriators on the Democratic side saying, we don't trust a handshake agreement or, vote on this today and we'll consider those and negotiate those tomorrow. They don't trust that at this point, even among each other, that's problematic. Mm-hmm. It's one thing for the Congress not to trust the White House. That's actually common. It is another thing when they say they don't really trust each other. But that's where we are. Right. And so I think that, there is an off-ramp. People sort of know that there's an off-ramp. But they have to get there and figure out, okay, we've identified how to get off this, merry-go-round. But how do we start that process? And I think we're not quite there yet.
Todd, you mentioned the ACA premium tax credits, and I'm curious what this shutdown and where we are in the stalemate means for tax legislation more generally, not just the ACA premium tax credits, but also potentially the resurrection of 899. Can you talk about where that might go?
So with respect to the premium tax credits, I think that even though they are rightly called tax credits, mm-hmm. because they're in the tax code, mm-hmm. They have always been treated, as with many things in the ACA, as healthcare. And so even when we were sort of talking about, before the shutdown, when there was a conversation like, at some point before the end of the year, they're going to have to address the ACA premium tax credit expiration. When you talk to folks on the Hill, everyone was looking at that as a healthcare transaction. So the tax teams on the Finance and Ways and Means Committee may have been involved, but probably sitting on the outside of the room and not at the table, because what they were all talking about was health. Now, that doesn't mean that, as we all know, if a tax bill is moving, whether they're calling it a health bill or whatever, if it's got tax in it, then because they move so rarely, someone's always trying to, get a ride, right? And there are other policies that would expire. I think, however, in the connection to the shutdown, if they find an agreement on getting out of the shutdown, I am somewhat dubious that there will be other things involved. I think it will be like, okay, we're fixing this in order to, end this current situation. And, is there going to be a tax bill later in the year? Time will tell. There are other provisions that are expiring, work opportunity tax credit, film credits, motorsports, et cetera. There are a range of other expiring provisions that might need to be addressed, but that would have to be addressed in a separate issue. Now, on 899, there were people who really wanted it to be in the OB3. It didn't get in there. Some of those people who were real strong proponents were upset that it was taken out, and they would like to see it revived, to your point. And they probably would like to see it revived sooner than later. My understanding is there are conversations about reforming it, revising it, amending it, et cetera, to make it more, acceptable to a broader audience, including maybe the parliamentarian or the Treasury Department. But at the moment, I think that the general gist or the general view is that they're trying to give the G7 countries and Treasury time to reach this, elusive agreement. Now, I do think, to your point of a revival, I do think that if we don't see any sort of concrete steps toward that agreement before the end of the year, I think that the reemergence of 899 becomes much more likely, perhaps even probable. But I think in the meantime, there is a sort of sense of we got to give Treasury time to make an agreement. But they don't have the leash is not unlimited in its length. So I think that they've got to make some progress.
Sure. Well, for a final question, maybe let's turn to the business perspective. What are you hearing from companies, and has the shutdown created any ripples through that side of the economy?
I mean, so far I haven't heard any. I haven't spoken to any companies that are like, "Oh my goodness, this is really clamping down on our business or slowing down our operations." But we know that obviously in different sectors, there are lots of sectors that are dependent on government contracts, the aerospace and defense, et cetera. There where sometimes those payments grind to a halt. And so, thankfully, probably a lot of the aerospace and defense companies are larger, so maybe they can kind of cover payroll during a brief period like this. But, there are also smaller contractors, et cetera. I don't think we've seen that kind of effect yet, because maybe those, maybe those payments were made at the end of September, and they're not expecting more payments until the end of October. So we're kind of in an easy period. So I think from a practical perspective, we haven't seen, real effects. But I do think that there are I have talked to companies that are concerned about, okay, they've laid off 1,400 more workers at the IRS. A lot of those taxpayers were already having issues like getting questions answered and getting, doing the things that they need to do to sort of file things and make decisions about, investments, et cetera. So I do think that while it may not be an immediate, hit to them, that remains a concern. And the longer this thing goes on, the more people are not getting paid. Then I think those ripple effects are going to grow. But right now, I think it's relatively contained.
Todd, thank you so much for your insights as always. Appreciate you being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And for our viewers, a link to recent episodes, including Week in Review with Mark Prater, is in the description of this episode, along with an interview about the CAMT guidance. Also, this is a reminder to register for PwC's Tax Readiness October 27th webcast about that CAMT guidance.
And finally, be on the lookout tomorrow for a special episode. Rohit Kumar interviews Beth Bell, a new member of PwC's Tax Policy Services practice. Thank you, as always, for spending this time with us. Have a great week.